Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Looking Ahead Episode 1, The Modern Basileus. This is the first of what I hope will be a bit of a running series within the podcast, focusing on the history of the Greek-speaking people after our main narrative finishes in 10 CE. It's a way to look beyond the Hellenistic age a bit, and hopefully should serve to keep our story a little bit fresh, rather than going through one chronology from start to finish. The plan is for these episodes to release in an alternating fashion with the main show, so one main show episode, then an episode of Looking Ahead, and so on. Now, I'm going to try and avoid going through the topic following a chronology, as I want to avoid focusing too much attention on when I should cover which topic. So, expect a smattering of random topics from Greek history from different periods. As such, today's episode is going to focus on a story about 2,000 years after we left our main narrative in 246 CE in episode 47. We're going to be looking at the accession of George I to the Kingdom of the Hellenes in the 1860s. Now, we're going to need a very brief summary of the history up until this point, as obviously I've not covered it in the remit of the main show. In summary then, the Roman Empire conquers the Seleucids under the general Pompey the Great in 63 BCE. The Roman Empire, as it then becomes, then goes through a lot of regime changes, such as the 50-year-long crisis of the 3rd century and the split of the empire between 4 individuals during the Tetrarchy. The empire permanently splits between the east and the west in 395 CE, after the death of Theodosius I. Maybe someday I'll try and summarise Roman history after the Hellenistic period briefly, but for now there just isn't time. So, the empire is now 2 halves, west and east. It had been split before, such as when Diocletian divided it between himself, Galerius, Constantius I, and Maximian. However, what makes this split different is that it will never reunite into one empire. The Western Roman Empire eventually falls on the 4th of September 476 CE, with the deposition of Romulus Augustus by the general Odoacer, who establishes the Kingdom of Italy. However, the East carries on after this. In fact, Odoacer sends messengers to the Eastern Emperor Zeno to give him the Western imperial signs, to basically tell him that Odoacer was subordinate to Zeno. The Eastern Roman Empire, often called Byzantium nowadays, became a Greek-speaking state under the Emperor Heraclius, who died in 641. Heraclius declared that Greek, which had been the tongue of the clergy and the populace for a long time by that point, was to be the official tongue of the Roman Empire. The Latin phrases Augustus, Imperator, and Caesar were swapped out for a more familiar Greek-sounding name, Basileus. The Eastern Roman Empire would not fall until its first collapse in 1204 CE, when the soldiers of the Fourth Crusade sacked the city. The Roman world would then be divided between the Latin Empire and the Greek successor states, the Despotate of Epirus, the Empire of Nicaea, and the Empire of Trebizond. It was Nicaea who would reconquer Constantinople from the Latins and reclaim the empire. The Eastern Roman Empire would collapse again for the final time in 1453 CE when Constantine I lost the city to Mehmet II. We've now dealt with Roman history, but what comes after? The Ottoman Empire would rule the old Greek lands until the Greek state became independent in the 19th century. Their first king was a man called Otto, but he would end up being overthrown. It's what follows after that is the subject of today's episode. This is a bit of a lengthy introduction, but there we are, context was needed. Otto of Greece was kicked out of power in October of 1862. We won't go into his reign here, however, because I'm trying to keep these episodes restricted to one topic rather than a general sweeping history. Needless to say, the Greeks were then left without a king. The question then becomes, what now? Otto had an heir presumptive, his brother Leutpold, but that idea went out of the window. So, who next? A lot of Greeks rallied around the idea of installing Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, as king. Alfred was the second son of Queen Victoria and the younger brother to the future Edward VII. He'd been born in August 1844, so for the purposes of our narrative, he's about 27 to 28 years old at this time. However, he refused to take the throne. You see, the London Conference of 1832 barred royal families from members of the great powers taking up the Greek throne. His mother, Queen Victoria, also didn't want her son to be king. Not to be deterred, it seems, the Greeks held a popular vote on the question anyway. There were 240,000 votes, and 95% of them went to Prince Alfred. 93 people voted to make Greece republican, and 6 were for a Greek national to be king. The deposed King Otto was voted for once, and I like to think that he voted for himself. Anyway, for our purposes, Alfred is out of the running. The Greek National Assembly then asked the Brits to choose somebody to fill their vacant throne. They selected Prince William, second son of the Prince of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glücksburg. His full name was Christian William Ferdinand Adolf George, but he was called William by others at the time. As an aside, his father was the future King Christian I of Denmark, making William a younger brother of Frederick VIII. The great powers each had their own candidates they wanted to push for. France wanted Prince Henry, the fifth son of Louis-Philippe I of France, while Britain had several candidates. It was a case of narrowing down the options to Prince William, as chosen by Britain, France and Russia in the end. Incidentally, he'd been given 6 votes in the referendum that I mentioned earlier. With that, we've got our king. The Greek National Assembly's election as King of Greece came in March 1863. William took the name George I, or Georgios I in Greece. All this was confirmed by the great powers in the 6th of June the same year, and he became king on Halloween, after arriving in the country the day before, following an extensive European tour. This succession also means he was given a kingly status before his own father, who wouldn't become Christian I of Denmark until mid-November. George was named King of the Hellenes, distinguishing his title from that of King of Greece, which his predecessor had claimed. In the end, he was probably a good choice for stability. He ruled from 1863 until he was assassinated in 1913, dying a few months before his Golden Jubilee and before his planned abdication in favour of his son Constantine or Konstantinos. As a final piece of info before we go, his son Konstantinos had a son with a name we've become quite familiar with on the show, Alexander or Alexandros, King of the Hellenes. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Feel free to get in touch with the show's email address if you have any questions or comments. This also applies if you have topics you would like me to cover in future Looking Ahead or Echoes of Alexander episodes. Until next time, have a great week everyone.